Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Hello brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode of Zakat Lessons. Today in part 2 we will be looking at who is entitled to receive Az-Zakat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. Allah says required charitable offerings are only for the poor, the needy, those employed for collection, to endear hearts to Islam, for the freeing of slaves, for those who have assumed debts in the cause of Allah, and for the stranded wayfarer, an obligation imposed by Allah, and Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. If you notice, brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He begins the verse with the word innama, which is a linguistic particle which indicates exclusivity. It indicates that the ruling, in this case, the requirement entitled to receive a zakat, is exclusive to the 8 individuals and categories mentioned, and that all others are excluded from entitlement. So when Allah says innama, it means He's going to mention certain categories to which or to whom the ruling applies, and that everyone else who's not mentioned, the ruling does not apply to them. And this serves 2 purposes. The first purpose is clarification. So rather than leave us to guess who is deserving and make poor decisions, I think that so-and-so or such and such individual or circumstance is deserving, and you think that so-and-so and such is deserving. And we base this upon our own, idea and outlook about things. So you spend your zakat in this direction, I spend my zakat in that direction, and the people who really deserve it don't get the zakat because it was left up to us. Rather than leave it up to us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clarified who are the people who are most deserving, and all we have to do is follow His instructions. The second purpose is it prevents trickery, scams, and attempts to beat the system. So because Allah specified those who can receive the zakat, a person now cannot give their zakat to themselves. For example, a person gives zakat to himself, or a person provides for his wife and children, which is a duty that he has independent of a zakat, and then calls it a zakat. He says, I provided for my wife and children, and that's my zakat. Or he makes an investment, right? He makes a business investment. He goes into business and invests in a business venture with another Muslim, and he calls that a zakat, although he expects a return on his investment. Or he gives a Muslim a loan, which he expects to have repaid to him, and he calls that a zakat. Or he pays his income taxes, and he calls that a zakat. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specified who are those who can receive a zakat, then in this way it prevents scams, and it prevents trickery, and it prevents people's attempts to beat the system. Allah has specified who can receive a zakat, and now we have to comply with what Allah has specified. Now when we look at the 8 categories that are mentioned in the ayah, we realize quickly that not all of them are necessarily applicable to our modern context and environment. So let's zero in on those categories which are particularly pertinent to our environment, our modern context, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, lil fuqara, the poor. The poor, or a poor person, is someone who has less than half of what he or she needs of the basic necessities for survival. We're talking about basic necessities, not luxuries. An example of that would be a person whose income is like $1,000, but their expenditures of necessities, basic necessities like shelter, food, clothing, transportation, etc., those basic expenditures and necessities of life cost that person in 1 month $3,000. So they're making $1,000 and they have expenditures of $3,000. That's less than half of what they need to survive. That person is considered poor and is entitled to Az-Zakat. Wal masakin, the needy. A needy person is a person who his or her expenditures, that person has more than half but less than 100% of what they need from the basic necessities of survival. An example of that, or a scenario which exemplifies that, would be a person who has an income of $2,500 and expenditures of $3,000. That person, if those expenditures, again, as I said, are basic necessities and not luxuries, that person will be considered from Ahl Zakat, from the people who are entitled to receive a zakat, and they will be considered from al-masakin, the people who have more than half but less than 100% of what they need each month for survival. وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, those employed for collection. This could be the zakat committee of your local masjid. This committee will take the responsibility of receiving zakat monies from members, as opposed to each individual member having to go and actively seek out people who are entitled. This committee will take that responsibility upon itself. They'll collect those funds, they'll receive those funds from members, and then they take the responsibility of actively seeking out people who are worthy and deserving in the community. And they'll also accept applications from people who are applying for zakat in the community and thoroughly vet those people and make sure that they really are entitled. And if and when they conclude that they really are entitled, they will give them that zakat money, making sure that your zakat money winds up in the right hands. Another example of وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, those who are employed to collect zakat, would be certain Islamic relief organizations that work in good causes, or worthy causes, I should say. And those relief organizations, they guarantee that any money which is specified as zakat money will not be used for overhead, and it will only be used for qualified expenditures. So those relief organizations, we trust them that they won't use the money for overhead because it's zakat money, and they also have the knowledge and they also have the integrity to make sure that the money is spent only on zakatable expenditures. Then Allah, He says, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, in the cause of Allah. And the scholars of tafsir have traditionally translated, or interpreted, I should say, fi sabilillah as al-jihad. Zakat monies can be used to equip soldiers engaged in conflicts fulfilling all conditions of legitimacy. So legitimate jihad, legitimate conflicts which fulfill all of the conditions of legitimacy, zakat monies can be used to equip the soldiers engaged in that. Now, some contemporary scholars have broadened the scope of fi sabilillah to include jami' wujuh al-khair, every noble cause, like the building or construction of masajid, the maintenance of masajid, the building of schools, etc., the building of playgrounds, the building of gyms and multi-purpose rooms, etc., for Muslim communities. They've included all of that in what? In fi sabilillah. But we have to understand, brothers and sisters, if that were the case, if the word fi sabilillah was that broad and that inclusive, there would be no benefit in Allah opening the verse with the word innama, as we discussed, when He says that He uses this particle indicating exclusivity, and then He uses a word which makes it broad and encompassing all of these different wujuh al-khair, all of these different noble causes. And so it is safer, considering that this is our zakat, this is our ibadah, it is safer for us to confine ourselves to the classical interpretation of fi sabilillah and the most common usage of the term in religious texts. Last but not least, from the pertinent classifications is وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ, and for the stranded wayfarer. A stranded wayfarer is someone who, in the course of traveling from one place to another, let's say, for example, from one state to another or across country, something like that, in the course of them traveling, they became destitute. And that could be because that person lost their money. The person literally lost their wallet with all of their cash and all of their debit cards, etc. They lost their wallet, lost their money, and now they have no way to what? To pay what they need to pay to complete their journey. Person could have been robbed at gunpoint, la samahallah, or waliyadu billah. Person could have been cheated or defrauded. And a person also could have spent the money. For example, let's say in the course of driving across country, their car broke down. And so they spent that money on car repairs, and now after paying what they have to pay for the car to be repaired, they have no money left. They're totally bankrupt at this point. A person in that situation is considered a stranded wayfarer, and we can give that person from our zakat money the money necessary to get them to reach from point A to point B, or to reach their destination. And that could include gas money. It could include money for a hotel stay, for food, etc. And so these are the categories of those who are entitled to receive a zakat. And inshallah ta'ala, in our next lesson, inshallah ta'ala, we will look at zakatable forms of wealth. Those forms of wealth which we have to pay zakat on. Until then, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless the rest of your day. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.